That Was Yesterday podcast is brought to you by Define Mind and Body Wellness, my wellness center here in Glastonbury, Connecticut, where we specialize in holistic services to help shortcut the process so that you can see results fast, but learn to do it in a habitual way. So many of the topics we talk about are part of the program that our clients receive, except they get much more in-depth detail. Also, my workbook of the 10-week program to lose and never look back, which is only available to our patients at Define. If you are interested in holistic body fat spot reduction, or our pod to increase your metabolism, or our cold plunge, or our sauna, which is the best sauna in the world, and that I promise you, I know that sounds biased, but you'll see for yourself. Please go to definewellnesscenter.com. You will be prompted to put your information in and make sure to mention podcast when you do, as you will be eligible for a bigger discount on our introductory services because you are a listener. Appreciate you. Have a great day and enjoy today's podcast. What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the That Was Yesterday podcast. I am your host, Joe Kiribati, and today I am talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart: men's health, and in particular, men's mental health. This is something I've had my own journey on. I've talked about it in other episodes, but in short, being bullied as a kid, being told stupid, retarded over and over and over, to a place where that is what I thought I was. And that affected how I spoke. That affected how I acted. That affected my ability to do things. And I went down this journey, this rabbit hole, if you will, starting really in high school into self-development. And I got into the fitness, and I was able to create a false sense of confidence from that. However, it really wasn't until I dove into the internal that my life really started to change for the better. And that's the mental health side of things, the mental fitness, as I like to call it. Look, as a country and really as a world, but let's just focus on the past 5 decades in the United States, there's a 3-time increase in obesity. It went from 13% obesity to 40%. A 50% rise in depression from 4.7% all the way up to 6.65% of men are depressed. And a 37% climb in suicide rates from 10.6% to 14.4%, with men comprising of 80% of the suicide rate, which is absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. And so on today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about how do we get here? What's going on? And I'm going to share a lot of what I've learned along my own journey that has enabled me to not just improve my own mental health as a male, but also help so many men that I've gotten the opportunity to work with. And if you are listening to this and you're a female, this is still going to be a lot of benefit for you, because yes, men and women are different, but there's a lot of crossover. But it might also help you understand the men who are in your life, and maybe the men in your life who kind of you have an issue with, or there are issues with, to help kind of put you in what was in their head, or why they might be doing what they're doing, right? Also, if you feel like any men in your life would benefit from this episode, please share it. That is how we can get the word out there. And any man who is listening, or any woman who is listening, who is interested in pursuing some coaching with hypnosis, so to change and rewire your subconscious, as well as transform your physical body, please reach out to me. You can hit me at Instagram at Joe Kiribati, or go to definewellnesscenter.com. Let them know you're interested in coaching or in hypnosis with Joe, and they will get you to the right place. Without further ado, let's get into it. So most of us men, I should say, we're taught some variation of don't cry, don't complain, just handle it. That resilience is power, that, being stoic and not showing emotion is manly, and that crying is weakness, and that sharing emotions is weakness or feminine or whatever. And the reality is resilience is a strength, and it's something very important, but that's not something that you can have without the other things, right? Like showing weakness, showing emotion, that is a sign of strength. But it's always, it's there has to be an and in there. And that's the problem. We live in a society where everything is black or white. We just can't have a gray area for whatever reason, no matter the topic. It's, there's this whole, maybe not so much now, but certainly like 5 to 10 years ago, there was this movement of like toxic masculinity, which sort of brought about this idea that, that men should have a softer side. And that is really important. And I agree, right? But I also agree a part of a man's makeup is the harder side. It's the yin and the yang. You need the feminine energy as a man, and you also need the male energy, the alpha energy as a man, really to be fulfilled in life. It's not one or the other, it's both. So strength can be having physical strength without a question. Strength can be crying. Strength can be showing your emotion. Strength could be standing up during hard times and leading through the uncertainty. And it could also be crying about something that you have no control over, that you're dealing with, or talking about your feelings or whatever it is. It's and the issue with that toxic masculinity movement is that it really ostracized a lot of men who were like, wait a second, whoa. Like, the thing is we have to realize if we're looking to address an issue, you want to address an issue without offending, right? And the problem with that whole toxic masculinity is like, well, first of all, there's toxic femininity as well, right? There are both. And yeah, there's a lot of a-holes in very powerful positions who screwed a lot of people. But those mistakes, we don't want to carry over and put it on every other man and make the race of men sound like it's a bad thing. I read a quote somewhere from James Cameron, the guy who he has a lot of amazing movies, but one of which is Terminator 2, Terminator 1, some of his most iconic movies, talking about how testosterone and sort of male energy is a negative thing. It's like, whoa, wait, what are you talking about, man? A part of your success was showing that, and why those movies were successful is because people resonated with it, both men and women. It's a part of our life. It's a part of our archetypes. Is that it's not a bad thing. Now, it's a bad thing when you're intentionally hurting people, and that's where it becomes the issue, right? So when I think of toxic masculinity, I think of like anything else. There are bad men and there are bad women. But masculinity is very powerful and we need to celebrate it. We should not hide from it. But I think the issue is that we as men inherit a lot of generational trauma. I think about my own story, right? My papu was an immigrant from Greece. So if you think about the immigrant sort of archetype, what happened? They came to this country with no money, working through famine, figuring out how to feed their families, oftentimes not having any support, which is crazy to think about. Like, now that I'm a dad of two, and I live in the state of which all of my family is. And so, you think about, right, like an immigrant moving into this country, not having any of that, right? And not having any education and figuring it out, right? And so by default, these men, like my papu, were very hardened. They were hard men because they had to be to survive, right? That then, if it doesn't get handled, and we're going to talk about how our consciousness and emotions tie into all of this, but if none of it, if your emotions and your feelings are not resolved at any point, they just get passed on to the next generation. So my father grew up with a lot of those same tendencies of my papu, of not being able to express anger in a productive way, not realizing and knowing how to express his emotions, and a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today, which is again not too different from a lot of you guys who are listening to this, man or women. A lot of our fathers have inherited generational trauma, and unfortunately, some of the trauma is way worse than what I just said. I work with a lot with my hypnosis patients. I would say 1 out of 3 of my hypnosis patients has had some level of sexual abuse, which is absolutely crazy, right? And now I am not making excuses for those men. That is absolutely inexcusable. That's just something you don't do ever. That being said, though, we also must acknowledge for someone to do that, there is a lot of darkness and there's a lot that's going on with them. And early on with our generations of elders, if you will, mental health really wasn't a thing. It was very taboo. It was like, you went to therapy, you were weak. And by the way, now we're on the other side of things where it's like most therapists have no time on their schedule. And now the culture is sort of monetizing therapy with all of these various apps that are not really delivering the type of work people need. And so therapy can be good, but it's like anything else. It can be good. And it could also not do what it really needs to do, which is get to the root of the issue. So today, my hope is to sort of navigate the issue a little bit to help bring about a lot of the insights that I've learned through my own experience. But generational trauma is a real thing. And if you were never taught as a man how to express your emotions, how to talk, like this is one thing that I had to learn, really in my intimate relationships, was how to speak an emotional language, like how to say, well, I feel this or this hurt when. I know that sounds crazy for women to understand, but it's hard for men to be able, like it's almost, in some ways, it's almost like speaking another language, because that's not a language that comes natural to us. Now, look, I would agree that all men should be able to say all of that stuff. Yeah, 100%. Like this is something I'm actively working on. I've been actively working on most of my adult life, and it's gotten better. But the point is, it just doesn't come easy or natural. And so for most, some different, right? I will say for sure, some men tend to have a better ability to express themselves in that way. But for most of us, it doesn't come easy. And so this is where, going back to that toxic masculinity thing, if you're approaching the problem from like toxic masculinity, it's like, well, you're really ignorant to some of the struggles that men have with trying to figure out how to even express their emotions, especially if they're hardwired through generational trauma and culture that, expressing your emotions is negative, it's bad, it's weak, and all of that. It's very hard to overcome. And again, that's not making an excuse for anybody. At no point is there an excuse ever to hurt anybody by showing, alpha type energy. Not at all. But the point is that it is hard. It doesn't come natural to us. And so, especially if you're in a relationship, right? Because if you are already struggle with being able to articulate your own feelings to yourself and really sit with yourself and sit in your shadow and things that you struggle with and work through that, it's going to be very hard to be, hold space for others in that same vein. So, this is something like anything. It takes work, it takes practice, it takes awareness. And that's hopefully what we're going to be doing today, is spreading some awareness. But last thing I would say to generational trauma is that it is a real thing, and it happens to women as well, by the way. However, with men, the topics that we're talking about today with anger, with sadness, with the lack of ability to express those things in a healthy, productive way, and apathy and shame, and a lot of these horrible feelings that so many men are suffering from. The thing with generational trauma, it's not genetic, okay? Like generational trauma gets passed down through behaviors and environment. And we need to stop blaming genetics, because what that does is it gives people this idea that, well, this is just how I am. No, that's how you're choosing to be. Now, you might not have consciously chosen to be that way, but if as a young little boy, you were modeling a man who was very temperamental and very angry and who did not know how to express his feelings in a productive, healing way, that's what you're going to think normal is. And then you're going to see things in culture that are going to reinforce that, because a lot of us are or were broken at some point. So that's not because you're born that way. It's just because that is what you learned, and most often it's not something you chose to learn. It's just what was put in front of you. And that's why you are how you are. And oftentimes, if you don't have the awareness, if you don't have a path to the other side, how would you know any different? Because again, you're just going to think, well, this is just how I am. This is how I was born. No, that's not how you were born. So the point there is that, at some point in our family tree, if there is a pattern of trauma, at what point are you going to put your foot down, your flag in the sand, and say, it stops here? At what point is that going to happen? Because if you don't actively do it, guess what? You are going to pass all of that to your kids and then to their kids and so on and so forth. And that is why this is happening over and over and over again, especially in minorities who have had really traumatic generational issues, right? You just think about how far these lineages go and where they came from. You got to think about, well, this is how, so today could be the day that you can at least say, look, I don't have the answers. And I'm not saying I have all the answers either, by the way. However, this is a change I want. And if it's a change you want and you're committed to the process, you will make that change, right? But this isn't like, oh, I just want to be better. Voila. No, that's not how it works. This is inner work. And work requires effort, all right? And the effort, at least for me and a lot of men that I've worked with, is just, it's just so uncomfortable sometimes to voice your feelings, and that requires effort in and of itself. And then it's like, well, what do I do with this effort, right? So we're gonna walk through this. Some other patterns that you see when you think about men's health are archetypes. So archetypes are like types of personalities, if you will, that exist in our culture, that have existed in our culture. Not to say like everybody's the same, no, but we all do fall under a relative archetype. And you can tell an archetype because there are patterns associated with that type of person, right? So you have, and then how it plays out for later years. And we see this in particular way more for men than we do for women. Again, men's suicide rate is significantly higher, 4 times higher than it is for women. So the archetype issue is a real issue. So some common appetites, I think I'm hungry. Common archetypes is the athlete, right? The guy in high school who, was really good at sports, and maybe so good at sports, he didn't really have to try hard with his relationships, friends, girlfriends. He didn't have to try hard in school because he was the athlete. He found meaning through sports. But then the lights turn off. You graduate from high school, you graduate from college if you played in college. Then what? If your life and purpose was centered around the meaning you got from being on the field or the court or whatever, and then you take that away, well, there's a real fall off there. And you see this a lot actually with female athletes as well. It's a real problem, right? If your entire life you were rewarded and complimented for being really good at something, and all of a sudden you can't do that thing as much as you want and you're thrown into the real world, it's like, wait, what? Who am I? Not to mention the physical element of it. If you're a high school athlete or a college athlete, you are practicing hours and hours a day, week after week. Your metabolism is responding to all of that effort, which means you're able to get away without eating as clean. Now, women get hit with this a lot earlier than men, but when your metabolism starts to slow down, which for women, they tend to see that like first or second year of college. For men, generally it's a few years after college, but there's always outliers either way. Then what? You have this slow metabolism, this lack of meaning, and that's where things can really take a decline. So that's in the archetype you got. You got the fun guy, right? The guy in high school, not fun guy like mushrooms, but the fun guy, right? And unfortunately, I had a friend who, is no longer with us, who fell into this archetype, and it's a sad story. Actually, know multiple people. But yeah, it's sad because, for them, they got the validation through making people laugh, and worse, when it wasn't just about making people laugh, but making people laugh either because they were the brunt of the joke. You see this a lot with overweight guys and gals, or because they were the party guy. They were the ones always getting the drunkest, doing the most drugs, and that's not cool, right? At all. But let's face it, when you're in high school, those types of people tend to be referred to as cool. The guy smoking a cigarette, and that's absolutely not cool. Trust me. But they feel that way. People look at them like that, and then they get to a place where it's like they never really paid too much attention in school because they were the cool guy. Then they may have went to college, and if they did, likely dicked around, or if they didn't, or if they did and they dropped out, or dicked around, did average, or didn't go at all, And all of a sudden, like, the coolness fizzles away when you're mid-20s and you're like, what am I doing? I'm just working this meaningless job with no end in sight, and all of my friends have moved on. That's a real problem. It's a real problem to deal with. You got the ladies, man, the guy who could get all the girls, and his validation came from women, girls. And similarly, if you find your meaning through that, you're going to go down a dark, empty place. I've been there. It's you know, and oftentimes, you know, with archetypes, there are similarities among archetypes where we have various parts of it. But if you're getting your validation anywhere else other than inside, you are destined for some level of depression, frustration, anger, you name it. You've got the quote-unquote fat guy, right? The guy who sort of takes pride in being the big guy. Again, the brunt of jokes, the funny guy, you know. But if you are the brunt of all those jokes, and that's sort of your identity in the group, and this happens with women as well. Like, you sort of form this identity because by virtue, that's what people refer to you as. That's what people know you as. And that's how you get attention. That's how you get acceptance. Well, what happens when all of that fades away? You're just left with that identity. And that's none of those are healthy identities to have if that's who you think you are and that's all you are. But the reality is that and there are a lot more, but those are the more common ones that we see. And the reality is, though, is that none of us are one thing, right? We're many things. But again, if you're searching outside of yourself for validation and acceptance, you're going to find yourself waking up in a nightmare. And it's going to be very hard to navigate the older you are. And when you tie in substance and when you tie in financial issues, which both of those two things tend to happen when what? When we have all of this bottled up trauma and emotion we don't know what to do with, we just need numbness, we need distraction. And so we can seek out those things. And so when you have all this pain and you're seeking out something that you are becoming addicted to that is not good for your health overall, it can take a real ugly spin quick. And social media doesn't help. You know, every single day when I'm on social media, I get frustrated. I see these guys, like even guys who I like and know, make these posts like, oh yeah, this is what all the athletes are, this is what all the actors are doing, peptides. Yeah, peptides are the new thing, man. Yeah, bro, like DM me peptides and I'll send you a cheat sheet, brother. It's like, dude, shut the fuck up, man. I hate that stuff. Or, because look, peptides might be good for you. Maybe, right? Same thing like testosterone and hormone replacement is like maybe there's a situation of which that is a good thing for somebody to do. The problem is that social media perpetuates this issue like everybody's doing it, like you need to do it, like it's just one simple fix with no downsides. The problem is that that's not the reality. And so many men who are taking peptides, who are taking testosterone or growth hormone replacement, they take it way too early, way too young. Young men should not be taking any of this stuff. Again, if you're a man in his late 60s who's healthy and who has done all holistic things on his own and you're still struggling with your testosterone levels, okay, different story. But for most people, that's not the case. This is embarrassing to admit, but I will share with you guys because why not? I was at a party for a friend of mine's, her dad's birthday party. And I'm not going to lie, I was pretty drunk. We were outside. I don't drink a whole lot, but when I do, you know, I like to have fun every now and again. This was hot out. It wasn't enough water, but I was talking to this couple and the woman is a hormone replacement doctor and she was like really cool, down to earth, wasn't like pushy or whatever. Her husband was trying to tell me how I should be on peptides and testosterone. And look, if you know me, you know I do not have my head up my ass at all. But I am also aware and I'm very confident in the effort that I put forth. I would say I would be in a top small percentage of men's physiques out there, just looking around and knowing what I know and doing what I do day in and day out that I have done since I was 14. All right. It's a big part of my life to be healthy and I push the envelope, but I'm just dedicated to it. Right. He was telling me I needed testosterone. He knows nothing about anything. And we weren't talking about, like, I wasn't like, hey man, I'm really struggling with this. It wasn't any of that. It was just like, hey bro, you should get on testosterone. I'm like, what? And what angered me wasn't that he said it to me. That's not it, believe it or not. It's that I'm going to like, before that point and since that point, you wouldn't believe the amount of conversations I have with men and with women who are told to do these things, that they just need to do this one simple fix. And yet they have a horrible diet. They don't exercise. They don't work on their mental health at all. And they're told to just take these things. And again, you see it everywhere on social media. So like for me, I have anger about it because it's like, dude, you are trying to get people, like, this isn't just like you take something and you're good. Oh, you can just take it forever. Like, no, you are taking something synthetic and you're putting it in your body. And especially for peptides, there is no long-term data at all. Okay, so that's number one. We don't know where this is all heading. All right, but you're telling people to just bypass things that they can actually do and control just to take this artificial thing. That shouldn't be how we shouldn't be prescribing medicine to prescribe medicine. And that's essentially what we're doing, is that when I say we, not we, but that man and other people like these guys on social media, just trying to get people to take this easy way out. And it's not just like a shortcut. And by the way, this is another untold part of the story, is that, and this is a part what really frustrates me, is that people who get led to think they need to do this don't get the full picture. Like, you can't just have peptides and eat whatever the hell you want. You can't just have peptides and never work out, right? You can't just take steroids and expect you to have a perfect lean physique. Like, first of all, there's a lot of downsides to consider with all of those things that are real side effects that happen to real people. But secondly, you still have to make the changes that you probably should make right now before you're even considering it. And that is what drives me off the wall, is that the misguidance. And so you take an unhealthy individual, well, and now we're just saying, hey, here's a simple fix and we're not going to fix anything else. That person is going to end up way worse. And that's what makes me so, like, I'm so enraged by it, because I see the outcome of it. I see people who have been down that path, and some of them, when you get off this stuff, there are real issues, you know? So social media doesn't help. All of that to say. Not one bit. And so please, whenever you hear anybody say anything, and myself included, like, take it with a grain of salt. Like, you know, anybody who just tells you this is the way and the only way, like, there's a real problem there. Okay. I'm simply saying, if you want to create physical change or mental change, it requires work. There's just no way to bypass it. And I am not against something that might make sense for some people, but only after you exhausted all the other options. And so, with that said, let's get into a little bit more tangible, sort of like the feelings and emotions that so many of us men get stuck with, right? And so I'm going to reference a chart, if you will, a scale, if you will, created by Dr. David R. Hawkins. He wrote many books, but Power versus Force and Letting Go, and particularly Letting Go, is one of my favorite books I've ever read. And I am not like a great reader. Like, it's not an easy read, but I've read that book more than almost any book I've ever read, just because it is so powerful. And so he created this consciousness spectrum, if you will, where it goes all the way from like the very bottom of the scale of like a low level consciousness, from, you know, apathy and shame, all the way up to enlightenment. And I don't agree with like the enlightenment goal for so many of us, because I think that's a very hard thing to ever get to. But everything else essentially on that scale, I think, is a very good objective way to see the impact of what your feelings that you're holding are. So really, there's two halves, right? There's the lower half, which is low consciousness, and then there's the upper half, which is a higher consciousness. The middle is neutral. And so, again, at the very bottom of it, it's shame, it's lack of meaning. A lot of those archetypes we talked about, what's the one thing they all had in common? Lack of meaning. So many men are going through this, and even beyond those archetypes. They have fun in college. They do things, they have some recreation with their friends maybe at a certain point, but they get into a job they don't care about, and then all of a sudden they blink their eyes and look up, and it's, you know, they're 40, they're 50, and they're like, who am I? And what do I even have? And what am I doing? And they're not happy in their job, they're not happy in their marriage, they're not happy in their body, not happy in their own skin. Those are real issues. Those are real issues. And so it's very easy to develop shame with that. But another way we develop shame in that way is that if you're never taught how to express your emotion when you feel sad, it's likely you're also going to feel shame. You're like, why are you feeling sad? Well, because you're human and all humans feel sad. It's okay to feel sad, right? Then you got guilt, and judgment is right above that. Guilt, there's a lot of ways this goes, but the judgment of self, I think, is the most powerful issue that so many, particularly men, have. And again, you relate it to social media because when we look on social media, most often we're looking at just these sort of slideshows of fantasies of like, oh, everybody has it perfect except for me. And we're comparing our wealth and our health to other people. And here, let me be the first one to tell you, if you haven't heard this yet, most of what you see on social media is bullshit. And anybody who is not sharing real downsides of their own life and sharing with others, they're hiding that. And that's not to say everybody is depressed. No, not everybody is depressed and not everybody's sad. The people who are the most successful in the world are not the people who have the most money in their bank account. Although I do think wealth is an important thing to strive towards. Why not? Right? It's only going to help you have more freedom for your family. If you're doing it for the right reasons, of course. But inner fulfillment is really what I define success as. And even the most successful people in the world, have all of these feelings of guilt, sadness, fear, shame, all of it. It's just some people have learned to learn how to cope with it and work with it. And that's different, right? That is success in that element. But so many of us were never taught that, right? So sadness is another level above that. Sadness is a very hard thing for a man to admit that he's sad. Why? Well, I know it sounds silly, especially to maybe a lot of women out there, but again, all that we talked about earlier, generational trauma, culture, all of it, we're led to believe sadness and tears and crying is a negative thing. It's not at all. Everybody is sad. And here's the thing, the most angry men that we know, under that anger is sadness. And so anger is higher up on the consciousness chart, and we'll get there because it has energy behind it. Sadness is lower because it's generally lack of energy. And this is the guys who sort of just are kind of apathetic with their life, not doing things to make their life better. And that's a really dark place to be in. Fear is right above that. Fear is something a lot of us men have because every human has it. But we're led to believe it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Fear is fuel. Fear is fuel. If you are afraid of something, there's energy in that. What are you afraid of? It's okay to be afraid. By the way, you have fear because that kept our ancestors alive, right? When our ancestors were living amongst the wild within their own tribe, they developed fear to be like, whoa, I got to keep it together or I'm going to get kicked out of this tribe. And if I'm kicked out of this tribe, well, there's no Uncle Sam or anybody else to help me out. I'm in the forest, the wilderness, the west, whatever, by myself, right? That's a real thing to be afraid of. Or if you're walking amidst the crazy, wild, pre-civilization, we're talking like when the human being evolved to what we are now, there was a time where there were a lot of things to be afraid of, right? Real life or death things. So we developed fear to keep us alive. And we have fear now because our operating system has not changed. The animal part of our brain is the same now than it was then. However, fear gets sort of rather than life or death. And by the way, we still have fear that keeps us, alive, right? We're not walking in front of a car, hopefully, right? If you're, no one's doing that who doesn't want to do that, right? We have the fear of, whoa, if I step in front of a car, I'm going to get hit. That's a fear. That's a good fear to have. So fear is not a bad thing. It's very important to at least start there. Fear is not a bad thing. But from there, the other things in life that is not life-threatening that you have fear about, those are things that you want to dig into. There's energy there. What is in the fear that can help you move forward? Because again, there is fear in all of us, but there's also fuel in that fear if you choose to see it. Desire is right above that. Desire sounds good, but desire is lust. This is the gambling. This is the anything of the hedonic nature of like over drugs, over sex, gambling, whatever it is. If you're putting your worth and your value and your passion all in these things that are just desired based, well, it's lust. It's empty. Ultimately, it's like you get to the end of the rainbow and there's nothing there but horrible feelings, right? And if that's just kind of who you become, then you're constantly living that sort of depressing Groundhog's Day. So desire, and again, desire can be with food, right? If you're so fixated on desire of the food without recognizing that, yeah, it's okay to enjoy that, but that's what that is. And that's something that I should allow myself to have every now and again versus that's what I need. And again, you don't need it, but it's the awareness to realize you don't need it. And separating desire from love. Love, by the way, is the very top of the consciousness, right? Above that is resentment and bottled up anger. When you don't know what to do with your sadness, you're going to bottle it all up. And that's going to turn into anger and rage. Why? Because it has to spill out some way, right? And there's a lot of resentment for men who are not doing something they want to do in their life, or they had an issue with somebody in their life that they never worked through because they don't know how to express their emotions. And that's a very unsettling feeling. And that's directly correlated with anger, which again is like sort of the byproduct of like having all this pent up emotion, not knowing what to do with it. And oftentimes we take it out on the people we love most. You see that with a lot of these domestic episodes is they're domestic because those are the people who unfortunately are around them and are dealing with all of that anger. And so what I would say is if you find yourself angry, think of two things. One, release through something physical. In other words, exercise. Combat cardio is amazing for anger. It's funny. There's this negative connotation of like mixed martial arts or martial arts, maybe not so much martial arts in general, but like MMA and boxing, like it's this negative thing. And yet, if you actually have ever spent the time to get to know people who do that stuff regularly, whether they're professional or they're just recreational, they're actually some of the most humble, nicest people. Why? Because they have an outlet for their primal energy. We all have primal energy, especially as men. You think about what our ancestors were at some point. Well, they were people who were protecting. At some point, they had to protect someone in their life, right? They were a protector. And if you're not demonstrating any of that now, that's another thing that can lead to anger. I know for sure, like I feel more angry when I'm not physically active. I notice that correlation. And in particular, combatives and martial arts and jiu-jitsu and boxing, all these things are amazing outlets when you're doing it for your health, not on somebody to hurt somebody. Obviously, protect yourself, but there's a difference, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is to realize if you're experiencing all this anger, there's something in you, there's a part of you hurt inside. And oftentimes that's the inner child. And yeah, it's hard for guys to go there, but that's a real thing. It is a real thing. And so start to ask yourself the question, like, what am I sad about? Or fill in the following sentence stem. I am sad because. Whatever comes to mind, say it. You don't have to read it back. It's not a book. Just write it out. Get it out. Express it. You'll be amazed at how much better you feel. Above that is pride. And pride sounds like a good thing. Like that was kind of like in high school, we were the Bobcats. We had the Bobcat pride, right? But the thing with pride is it's directly tied to your ego. And it limits your sort of consciousness and your overall sort of beliefs. And we as men can absolutely be too prideful to do things that are, not manly, right? Or that we're embarrassed or ashamed of. And oftentimes it leads to an overcompensation to show that pride. And that's where pride can really be a negative thing and keep you in that suffering zone, right? But above the suffering zone is relief. And relief is something that we all need, but especially men, and especially men with mental health issues. Again, suicide rate, 80%. We can do better than that. It should be a lot less than that, right? I wish it was 0%, but unfortunately, that might be wishful thinking. But the point is that all of this stuff, if you really take some time to think about it, and forget about everything I'm saying, if you just take time to work on yourself every day, you will be a better version, all right? But not doing anything is only going to cause issues. So moving you up the ladder into relief starts with courage. You have to have the courage to take the step, to admit that you need help, to go to the gym, to sign up for hypnosis, to start walking, whatever it is, requires to pursue something you're passionate about, right? To take calculated risks. That's an important part of it, right? The inner rebel. So I'm a voice dialogue facilitator, and in my hypnosis and coaching clients, I do a lot of voice dialogue, working with the various parts within you, helping people mind map what their consciousness is. You'd be amazed. So many of us have a disowned part called the rebel, the inner rebel, who at one point in their life had some adventure in them. And all of a sudden, through life, that part of them just became sort of disowned and put in the corner and locked in the closet. And that then manifests into overeating, over drinking, getting into trouble, because that part needs to represent itself somehow, but it has no other outlet. So courage is taking calculated risks to explore that inner rebel within you. Above that is the willingness to do something different, to break the stigma, to say, no, I am not passing this generational trauma on anymore. Acceptance is right above that. Acceptance is so important, right? Acceptance is whatever is, right? Not fighting reality. There's a really great quote I was about to spit out that I just had a brain fart on, but oh goodness, it's a good one too. Sorry guys. But the reality is like you can fight reality all you want. You know, like what is what is. What you can do and what you can control is how you respond to what is. That's the only thing you can really ever do. And all you can ever really control is inside of you, your emotions, your feelings. That, by the way, you can control, as well as your actions. And just accepting there are things outside of your control. If you fight things that are outside of your control, or you fight reality, you're going to have anxiety. Because there's a part of you seeking out control that is just not possible. So you can't control things outside of yourself. And when you do that, you are not accepting, right? So you're getting pushed into the lower consciousness. So if you do express a lot of anxiety, there's probably things that you're holding on to that you need to look at, like, how much of this can I control, right? There's a really good exercise I have in one of my workbooks where, and I didn't create this. I forgot where I think I borrowed it from Dustin Poirier. I heard him talk about it. But you figure a piece of paper, right? And then a circle inside of that paper. And inside the circle, you write all the things you can control. Outside the circle, you write all the things you can't control. And that's very important to put pen to paper to see this stuff. Because if you just keep everything bottled inside, it's very hard to decipher what's real and what's not. The next part, Dr. Hawkins often refers to like reason or logic, but what he really means, I believe, my interpretation is objectivity, of like looking at, so we, accepting what is, but now it's like looking at things from a perspective of like, okay, this is what it is. Because if you can reach objectivity, you can make a clear decision. And you're also not suffering for no reason. So many of us suffer for no reason. We suffer for things that we cannot control. And not to say you shouldn't have those feelings, because you should, right? But at some point, you have to mourn those feelings and move on. And yes, you have to mourn those feelings. You can't just, I don't want to feel like this. I'm not going to feel like this. All right, like good luck, bro. Good luck, because that shit's going to manifest and bite you in the ass if you just think that. You got to mourn it. You got to deal with it, right? You got to mourn your emotions. And you're going to have emotions repeatedly. You can mourn a certain emotion, and we're not just talking about death, by the way. You can mourn a certain sadness you have related to something that happened in your childhood. That doesn't mean you're never going to be sad again, right? We're humans. We are messy humans. And if you think you're above that, come on. Really? You're messy and imperfect like me and everybody else who's ever existed. So when we can start looking at the situation as like, so a way to use objectivity, right? And I give this to almost all of my patients, is a technique I call labeling. So quite literally, you take a Post-it note. I'm trying to find a Post-it note here to show the video. So you take, and you can do it a lot of different ways, but I like to use Post-it notes, right? So you have them handy with you. You're feeling a certain way, anger, sadness, jealousy, whatever it is. Write down whatever that is. Now, it doesn't have to be like this perfect like definition. It doesn't have to be this perfect label. If you start to think that and feel that, just pinch yourself and be like, oh shit, this is self-sabotage, because that's what that is. There's no right or wrong here. It's just really the purpose of labeling is stopping and saying, wait a second, what am I feeling? Writing it down. When you write it down, you're creating separation. So what was in your head before, you sort of attached to your identity. But when you write it out, you're creating separation. Now you're getting to a place where you can have more clarity, because it's not just like blinding you now. It's in front of you. You can see it. Your glasses are no longer fogged. And now you can start to think objectively of like, okay, where did this feeling come from? Is this something that I want to feel? If I don't want to feel it, how can I heal it? What part of me is hurt from this? And you start asking those questions, and you'd be amazed the answers you get. By the way, when you write out questions on paper, the universe has a way of conspiring to help you find those answers, to put, I call them omens, signs, things along your path so that you are able to navigate it all. But objectivity can only happen when you are extracting whatever is inside of you and putting it on some form of paper. And then, above that, you got, love and joy. But look, it's very hard to get to love and to get to joy if you didn't do everything else. Now, with the consciousness chart, one thing that I like to sort of, when I talk about this, I like to share with people, because it wasn't so obvious to me at first, was that you're going to oscillate up and down, right? You're going to have moments of sadness and anger, but you could also have moments of love and joy. It's like, I could have a really shitty day at work, and as soon as I walk in my door and I see Joey and Maeve run at me, like, I don't give what happened. I don't know whatever is going on. Like, I am joyful. As parents, those of you guys who are parents, the joy of children is unlike anything else. But I will say this on that note, because I feel like there's a caveat here, and there is a caveat here, which is, and for those of you guys who don't have kids, don't just think having a kid is going to solve all your problems, because it's not, all right? And if you got to be careful not to just go into something like that and not work on yourself and just pass all your shit to them, right? We talked about generational trauma. Case in point. That being said, let's round home here. Here are some real tangible sort of like one-liner things. Because for me, like, I'm a simple guy. I like simple instruction. So just here are a few things that we all need to do in order to maintain our health. Number one, prioritize your health. What is health? Health is internal. I call it mental fitness. But it's also physical, right? So often you hear people say, I'm going to lose weight, then start working out. Like, goodness gracious, I hate when I hear that. And that's not because people are making that excuse. There are people who are selling that bullshit. Oh, just do the diet first. And like Activia is one of them, by the way. And by the way, if you lost a lot of weight through Activia and you kept it off and you're doing well, great, good for you, but most people do not. And the problem I have with Activia in particular is that they actually instruct you not to be physically active for the first 30 days because your calories are so low. That's not healthy, guys. And what happens when you don't do their shakes and meals, right? Don't get me started on that tangent. The point is health. You have to prioritize it. You don't have to. You can do whatever the hell you want, but it's not going to end well. That's what I can tell you with 100% certainty. Your physical body needs to be moved. Why do so many people have issues sleeping at night? Well, most of those, and this is not the one answer for everybody, but oftentimes people who don't move their body at all have their muscles and energy is pent up, and at night they're just squirmy and their body's moving or their mind's moving. They didn't express themselves enough, and that keeps you up. That's one thing, right? One of many things. But the point is, it's not just your mental health. It's not just your eating. It's not just your physical exercise. It's all of them. And that's not to overwhelm you, right? Because here's a really simple solution for you. Commit to 5 minutes of what I call an EMOM. I don't just call an EMOM. Actually, I think everybody calls it an EMOM, right? Every minute on the minute, or a density set where 5 minutes, give me 5 minutes and just do whatever exercises you know to do, in 5 minutes, 10 reps from one to the other. Just keep going, or play a song that you love that motivates you, and just move in a way you feel comfortable for the length of the song. Do that 3 times a week. You can do that. You can tell me you can't do that. You're full of shit. You can absolutely do that. Another way to express your health with eating: drink more water, eat more protein, eat more vegetables. Don't worry about dieting. Don't worry about cutting this, that, the other thing out. Just focus on those 3 things. You will be healthier. Simple tip for mental health: journal. every night before bed. Just journal, brain dump, whatever's on your mind, get it on paper. You're not writing a book. You don't need to narrate it. You don't need to share it. You don't need to read it back. Just get it out of your mind, because if you don't, your subconscious mind, only thing your subconscious knows to do is to focus on what you make a priority. And if you're thinking about something, your subconscious thinks that that is a priority. It doesn't know good or bad. So if you're focusing on your issue rather than getting it out of your head, well, guess what? Your subconscious is going to bring about more that's going to perpetuate that issue. So start with 5 minutes of journaling. Boom, bada, bang. Those are 3 things you can easily do. All right. That was number 1. Number 2 is setting boundaries. Protect your health, protect your professionals, and protect your personal energy by setting boundaries. And this is a very hard subject, because I know a lot of women, and I know a lot of men, by the way, as well. But we're talking about men's health, right? So we're say women here, but a lot of women like give these restrictions on their man, like when it comes to exercise, of like, hey, you gotta be home at this time. And look, I get it if it's like guys out in a bar doing whatever, but like you as a man, you as a woman, both need to have carved out boundaries of like, hey, this is what I'm doing for my mental health, my physical health is non-negotiable. When I say prioritize your health, I mean prioritize your health above everything. That means above your kids, because your kids, you can't be who you need to be for them if you don't prioritize your health. And what are you teaching them if you're not living a healthy life? Now we're talking about legacy and generational trauma again, right? We don't want that. So set boundaries around what is protecting you. In other words, what your healthy things are. And by the way, it's not just exercise, it's not just mental health type stuff. For some of us, it's recovery and recovery physical, of course. But for me, I have a lot of empath energy in me, where people both energize me, but they also suck energy out of me. So like, I need time by myself at night. And this is after I put my kids down, by the way. So I'm putting my kids down and I'm going to bed later so I can have this time. That's how important this time is. I firmly believe for me to decompress and just recover from the day so I can be who I need to be the next day. Number 3 is leverage your inspiration. Now, if you have kids, that's very easy. Think about, this was something when I first had my daughter, I was really, I was just sort of like really breaking into like really understanding my psyche at a deep level. But even then I found myself like picking out my sort of, my blemishes in pictures and almost getting down on myself. And I was like, whoa. And it's one day I looked at myself and I saw my daughter, because her and I, there's a lot of my wife in her as well, but there's a lot of me in there. And I thought to myself, God, I would never want my daughter to do that. And I'm like, wait a second. If I don't want my daughter to do that, there's no way in hell I should be doing that. And that's not good for me. I don't want to do that. This doesn't make me better at all. And really, from that point on, I just think about my kids anytime I find myself, because I'm human. We're all human. We all are going to, but I catch it right then and there. I don't want my kids to do that. I ain't doing that. Those are my inspiration, my kids, right? But I'm also inspired by a fire within me. And if you don't have that fire within you, that brings me number 4 here, which is exploration. What is your meaning? For me, I was fortunate enough to go through the struggles I did as a kid that brought me into fitness to help me realize that, oh gosh, this is actually something that comes easy when everything else came hard. School was so hard for me. Reading was so hard for me, but I could read any book about fitness. That gave me a clue. And I had a good mentor at the time, Doug Rice, forever grateful, really encouraged self-development. And that really helped me. And that led to me taking a risk. And my dad was an entrepreneur. My brother was an entrepreneur. So I saw that it was possible, right? So those are vehicles that allowed me to express my meaning in that way. And plus, going through that hardship of being bullied and feeling like nothing, right, where I used to as a kid, also made me extremely empathetic to people who are going through a lot of issues. And it gives me the ability to hold space for those people. And another thing, shout out to my mom, because she is the most angelic woman I've ever met. And she's all about helping people. So it's like that helped me as well. But if you don't have, so I was very fortunate for all of those things that enabled me to find my meaning, right? And I'm still discovering it and fine tuning it, right? It's never just you get there and it's over. Life is like a video game. At the end of every video game, there's a monster or some sort of boss that you have to overcome to get to the next level. And wherever you're at right now on your journey, the obstacles that you're facing are on the way. But the only way for you to get through them is to overcome whatever's inside of you that makes you feel like you can't. Makes you feel like that this is the end. It's not the end. It's just a challenge. And you have what's in you to overcome that challenge. And then that will propel you to the next level. And by the way, the next level will bring about greater resilience. It will bring about a greater level of strength on all levels and joy and love and all of that. But there's also a monster at the end of the next level as well. The difference with life is that, fortunately, until we no longer leave, there's level after level after level, which can be viewed pessimistically. I think it's actually a really good thing, right? It makes life exciting. If everything was easy, what value would it bring, right? Lastly, maybe I don't know if I would say most important. They're all important. Grace. You're a messy, imperfect human just like me and everybody else who's ever lived. You're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes. And mistakes I'm not proud of, I've made. And even to this day, things like, you want to do well, you want to do your best. And especially as a parent, you're doing everything you can to be present, but you got all these other stresses and things going on. And sometimes you can lose your temper in a little moment with your kid and realize, but then it's like, oh, wait, what am I doing? Catch that. It's okay. Don't be mad at, no. But then it's also expressing that love back to be like, hey, daddy was a little cuckoo there. I'm so sorry. I love you. But whatever that is, right? We have to, but it starts with our grace for us to project out the love that we want to project. If you don't love yourself, and that sounds like really crazy, but really self-love is really what confidence is. If you can't have real confidence without self-love. You can have artificial, externally validated confidence, but if you don't have self-love, you will never be confident. You will never be fulfilled, because a part of fulfillment is overcoming obstacles and issues. That is what makes things fulfilling. And you can only go through all of that if you allow yourself to make mistakes and you allow yourself to be imperfect and not be so judgmental about it, right? We talked about judgmental being on the lower end of the consciousness spectrum in the suffering zone. Well, on the higher end is love. And love isn't when things are good. Love isn't when things are bad. It's both. So that if you can express that to yourself, love yourself when you're doing really well, love yourself when you're struggling, through grace, that's when everything else changes. So that is all I have for you guys today. I hope this was helpful in some way. I always love hearing from whoever messages or tags me in posts to share with other people. It means a lot. Helps get the word out there. So if you found some value there, I'd appreciate it if you would do that as well. And if you are somebody who would benefit from working with me or working with Define, please reach out to us, definewellnesscenter.com, and I'll see you in the next episode.